Greetings everyone, and welcome to our last, sort of, our last summary lecture. It's really our last official summary lecture, I can say that for sure. We're going to be covering chapter 15 in your book, or at least some of it. I'm going to really hit the highlights this time, and there's a lot of stuff that we're going to skip. And there's a possibility that I might be posting another sort of summary. It won't be a summary lecture, but maybe some more personal face-to-face video with me time. Well, it's not really face-to-face, it's your face looking at my face, but that's it. Time to talk about your projects and stuff like that. But this will be the last portion of the book that we cover. It'll be, I guess you could say, the last new material that I'm going to expect you to integrate into your final proposals. Because as we've talked about before, we just don't have time. There are other parts that I want to focus on, and even though things like budgeting are very important, very, very important. I figured if anything had to go, that would be a good one because it's A, the thing I know the least about, and B, something that could potentially, restrict your imagination, which isn't something I necessarily wanted to do. So we're going to stop here at developing a plan for monitoring and evaluation. And on the theme of, kind of skipping over things, I should mention, I'm going to be talking mostly about evaluation. So I'm going to pretend like your campaign is done. And I want to talk about, okay, well, after the campaign is done, or maybe it's even been going and you're just curious about how it's going, how do you evaluate the impact that your campaign actually had? All semester we've had all sorts of plans, right? We've had all sorts of very optimistic goals about how our promotional strategy is going to change a behavior or change an attitude in a particular population. But if we don't do some sort of evaluation, we're never going to know. And one of the learning objectives this week is to really understand why evaluation is so important. One of my favorite stories that I like to tell about this is I may have even mentioned at the beginning of the semester when we were talking about formative research, and I talked to you about the Partnership for a Drug-Free America, This Is Your Brain on Drugs campaign from the 80s. This, was back when Nancy Reagan was launching war on drugs, and there was a lot of anti-drug sort of campaigning going on around then, and in hindsight, what's interesting is that even though that campaign's very memorable, and the fact that most of you probably know what I'm talking about, it's the, got an egg, this is your brain, frying pan, this is your brain on drugs, even though that's such a memorable thing and it's been spoofed and parodied and reproduced and all this stuff, it wasn't necessarily very effective, research showed, in actually changing people's drug use behaviors. So now look, if you're evaluating a campaign based on how well people remembered something, you could say it was effective. But if you're trying to actually measure whether or not a campaign actually affected the key target behavior that you're doing, right, you actually have to go and try to figure out how to measure that behavior. And the reason this is super important is because, well, firstly, people who are doing campaigns need money. And a lot of people don't want to give campaigns money, or the people who design campaigns money, if they can't demonstrate that what they're doing is effective. So that's why I kind of mentioned before, I was like, even if you haven't completely finished up a campaign, there might be, as a campaign's going on, an effort to evaluate what's happening, monitor, as it's going, just as a way to keep up with whether or not this is going okay, because you don't want to keep putting money into something that's not working. But likewise, right, it's really important to sort of have a summary of what worked and what didn't work. This is in part because of the funding issue, right? Nobody's going to want to continue or fund more related projects for something that doesn't seem to be working. It can also give you an indicator of what needs to change. Maybe there just needs to be some tweaks or revisions. And on that note, just theoretically, it's really important to understand why. Because even if you're not going to be launching the exact same campaign, you might be doing some other sort of social marketing thing, different things that make one campaign work and another one not, could inform other campaigns. And that's why people like me in the academy like studying this stuff, because when we look at campaigns, I don't do as much of the design as I am working on the type of research about what's already come. And the idea is that if I research one campaign and find that there's some particular technique is very successful or very unsuccessful, my job would sort of be to explain why that is so that other campaigns can use that knowledge without reinventing the wheel and, potentially losing a lot of money. Okay, so the only really key things from this chapter that I'm going to want you to know and to some extent reference in your proposal, I want to talk about measuring output, okay? Well, actually, a little more of a preview. We're going to talk about measuring output and outcome measures. Output or process are the measurements that you take of what your campaign has put out there, right? What are the things that you've actually done or tried to do as far as pushing your messages or getting attention to different issues, okay? So these are, to a great extent, pretty much everything you've been talking about. A process measure would be trying to figure out how well you reached your audience, how many brochures you handed out, those types of things. Where an outcome measure is more talking about the outcome of the campaign itself on your target behavior or attitude or knowledge or whatever. So just to break it down a little bit more, another way of thinking about this is a process measure or an output measure is sort of a way to quantify what your marketing has done. Okay, if you had to describe to somebody, we we had 18 television spots, or 16 news broadcasts picked us up, right, and talked about this, or things like that. Those are all things that you sort of put out there as part of your campaign. So I've already mentioned a couple of these. One of them is how many materials did you distribute, right? If you were trying to conduct some sort of like summary for maybe a stakeholder or a funder or your campaign team, you would want to have numbers about, again, if you had some sort of text, how many flyers or signs were posted. You would want to know how many people visited your Facebook page that you set up, right? Although that's not really a material that's published. Yeah, hopefully you see the parallel. Reach and frequency, maybe that would actually be a better way of doing it. So you have a message, right? So let's say you put a banner up, and so you can say I had 8 banners. How many people actually saw your banner? I see actually at WVU there's a, for those of you that are familiar with the campus, there's like a bridge that goes over Beechhurst Avenue, which is the busy road in front of the downtown university, and there's a bridge, and they always have banners there, so I think that's why I'm thinking about banners. It's like Heart Disease Awareness Month or something, so they've got a banner. Okay, that's one banner, but its reach would be how many people saw that banner? How would you calculate that? Well, obviously it's going to be an estimate most likely in some cases. So you might find some sort of measurement of how many people drive down that road each day and would be exposed to it. That might not necessarily be the number of people that saw it, but maybe there's some research that says that banners placed on this bridge attract at least 1 out of every 5 drivers' eyeballs or something like that. Again, I'm making it all up, but the idea is that you might have to do a little outside research to get a decent estimate of how many people your message reached. Same thing if you have like a television spot on the air, right? You want to know, okay, fine, I put X number of television commercials out, but how do I actually know how many people that television advertisement reached? Well, hopefully, if you spend money on advertising, the people who you're paying can give you some indication of that. It might be a little inflated, but they'll like to tell you, based on the time that you're putting it in, and it's after this television show, and so chances are X number of people were watching when your television, commercial came on. I'll say something. Social media actually, makes a lot of this really easy. A lot of new media and technologies have automatic counters, and not only do you get an idea of how many people might have seen something, you get engagement measures, because when people like something, that's a measure of like engagement. I know I run the social media for our department here, and if you have like a professional page, it'll actually give you metrics of things like how many people clicked on a picture to like get zoom, see it zoomed in or something. You don't get that on your regular Facebook page, but it's the type of thing that social media companies have made more readily available to people they know are interested in these types of metrics, right? Because if you're interested in trying to figure out what sort of impact those messages had, whether it's in a campaign or not, all of those metrics are really handy. It even gives you like charts so you can see like how well it did at different times of day and stuff like that. It's kind of geeky, but fun because I like social media and I like this stuff. So at the end, right, you'd actually ideally like to come up with what they call a cost per impression figure. And this is literally trying to figure out, okay, if I can figure out the number of people that saw my message based on how much it actually cost to put up that banner or get on the television advertisement, then I can come up with like a number of, for each person that saw it, how much those eyeballs cost me. You know, not literally eyeballs, sorry, that's gross, but how many, I can come up with a number with how much it costs to reach one particular individual. And again, I'll bring up Facebook again. They actually work an advertising model based on this, where they let you come up ahead of time and say, okay, I want to pay $10, and they'll say, okay, for $10 we can, you know, get you this much exposure, and it'll be broken down in a metric of how many people are going to see it, how many people are going to click on it. So they've already sort of figured out a metric, and then I'm essentially paying whatever they've determined is the cost per impression. So the other thing I want to mention is that, you know, around this time, right, when you're trying to think about like what you actually put out there, you might want to take account of the things that went as planned, but more importantly, the things that didn't go as planned. So when you're already trying to figure out, okay, what did we actually do? What was our output? It's a good opportunity to sort of like take an audit or accounting of the things that sort of went as planned and the things that didn't go as planned. And the reason that's important is because at the end of the day, if let's say, unfortunately, you find out that your campaign wasn't that successful, it's really important to know though if something went wrong, right? So maybe Partnership for a Drug-Free America wasn't successful because, I don't know, half of their television advertisements didn't air at the time they were supposed to or something. I don't know. That's really not why it wasn't successful. But you get my point, meaning if you don't, at this point, when you're trying to figure out all the things that you did, it's a good time to just take stock of the things that went according to plan and the things that didn't, because that might play into your final summary evaluation. Okay, so, and this is what I really want you to sort of focus on, because you're going to have a good idea of your output anyway, especially since at this point your campaigns are all make-believe. As far as your outcome measures, though, this is where social science comes in. And I know a lot of you have had a little bit of an introduction to research methods in this program, and I hope that through conversations like this, you understand why it's really important, because even if you yourself aren't doing the research, understanding how you can use social data to answer certain questions you have, or to persuade other people that what you're doing is good, hopefully, right? Or what somebody else is doing is bad, it's a really important skill to have. And the way that you're going to figure out how you measure your outcome is by really thinking about, let me step back. What we're trying to do right here is determine if your campaign was successful or not. The only way to do that is to look at your goals, to look at that key behavioral objective you've had, and determine whether or not you accomplished that objective or not, okay? So in order to figure out how to do that, you first of all need to take your behavioral objective and really look at it closely, because chances are most of the answers are in that objective. If your objective was to have some sort of effect on behavior, then you're going to need to take a behavioral measurement to determine if you accomplish that or not. Ideally, right, you would be in a situation where the whole reason you're doing this campaign, right, the whole reason you're engaging in this sort of social marketing is because you already had some sort of baseline measure of how many people were registered as organ donors, okay? So you probably already knew that, and you're looking probably at your own target population. So how do you determine if your campaign was successful or not? Well, if your objective was to increase the number of people who were registered as organ donors, then of course what you're going to need to do is look at that same behavior after your campaign was launched. Okay, so I know you're thinking simple enough. Well, the thing is, a lot of you don't have maybe such a solid metric as organ donation registration. Some of you guys might just be trying to move people into, you know, we talked about contemplation and pre-contemplation, all these different stages that you can have before somebody actually adopts a behavior. Maybe you're just looking to see if people would have more of an intent to adopt a behavior, and that's fine too. You can use survey research for that. You can look to see if you know, after exposure to the campaign, and you can actually ask them questions on a survey like, did you see this message? Right? Do you remember this message? Right? You can check to see if they remember seeing the message and see if that correlates with a higher intention to become an organ donor or a higher intention to, you know, donate clothes to Dress for Success or whatever charity. You know, I mean, again, this applies to any sort of social marketing endeavor. Same thing with attitudes or beliefs. Maybe you guys weren't looking at behaviors at all. So you're really, in that case, you're not going to be able to look at any hard outcome as far as did their behavior change. You're actually going to have to ask them, because the only way you can do that to figure out what somebody's attitudes are outside of, you know, reading their Facebook posts is to actually go and ask them how they feel about this. And you can use a scale that says, you know, before they scored, you know, 1 out of they scored 1 out of 7 on you know, liking summertime. But now that we've convinced them that winter is so great, right? They scored like no, sorry, I messed that up. Now that we've convinced them that that summer is actually great. That's it. Okay. They score a 5 out of 7, right? So that's why we have all these scales. And if you've ever taken a survey, it's because those little metrics right there, scored 1 at the beginning and now they score a 5, allows us to compare pre-campaign and post-campaign responses. So that's another thing you can do. You can do the same thing with awareness. More, as your book points out, more controversial, sometimes people will try to get what's called an impact measure. And this is kind of saying, okay, it's like a step further than the actual behavior that you were trying to get done. So it would be like with organ donation. Okay, how many lives were saved from our campaign? Because the truth is, the whole reason you would want somebody to register as an organ donor is because you're thinking about how organ donation saves lives, right? So do you see how that's like a step removed? Well, in theory, you could say things like, well, since this campaign was launched, you know, lots of people have become organ donors, but more importantly, here's all the lives that have been saved because of organ donors. The reason this is controversial is because it's not very direct, right? There could be other factors that come in that could explain why so many people's lives have been saved. It actually wasn't the behavioral objective of your campaign, but doesn't it sound good? You know, like if you're trying to get funding for something, it sounds much more impressive to say that because we launched this campaign, because we got more registered donors, right? Potentially even, we could have saved X number of lives, and that's like a huge impact. But for your purposes, it's those outcome measures. I just want you to think about how you could set up, and you don't have to do it. I'm not making you do it. I just want you to think through the process. How do you set up how do you come up with the evidence, right, to persuade somebody that your campaign was effective? And I shouldn't have worded it like that because the goal, of course, is truth. It's not to say it was successful when it's not, but to evaluate, keyword here, to evaluate the success of your campaign. So the question is how do you tell if you accomplished what you set out to accomplish? And if you have multiple behavior objectives, you're going to have to take that into consideration. But really, this should be an overall, you know, a small paragraph where you just set out to plan. I'm going to survey people, and I'm going to ask them if their attitude changed, you know, and if it changed this much, then I was successful. Or I'm going to look at the number of registered donors before, and I'm going to look at the number of registered donors after and see if it made a difference. So that's kind of what we're getting at here. And I actually think that covers it. You know, the whole goal here is just to get you thinking about how would you even know if what you did worked or not, and hopefully also to appreciate sort of the role that, once again, research has in this overall social marketing process, because it's super important and it keeps us from making mistakes, and it also keeps us up on theory so we can develop better campaigns of the future. And I really think that's it. Yay! We're done! Sort of. Almost. So close.